Well, hello. I'm headed north out of Sturgis. I'm actually almost to Newell here because I didn't realize it, but I had unplugged my dash cam. So I thought today we'd talk about the Ten Commandments. You know, it's a religious subject, but those can be fun. And this is doubly good for me because it's 92 degrees right now. I am on May 26th, 2018, and I've been working in my garden, and now it's so hot that I'm only lasting like an hour at a time, and then I got to come in and drink lots of water. So I'm going to take a longer break and see if I can get some more done when it cools off. So I thought I'd narrate this and look at snow. And yeah, what a lot of snow it became. So you saw the title of this video was the Ten Commandments. I promise I'm not going to try to be offensive to anybody with this. This is more an informative video. Just information. And I don't know if you're a believer or not a believer, you may run into something you didn't know. I will say those of you who are European viewers may find some of the angst over this issue here in the United States a little puzzling. But it is the way it is here in the United States. There is a lot more angst, a lot more religion. Religion plays a more powerful role in our society here in the United States, for better or for worse. So, of course, you can expect to see the Ten Commandments hung in churches, because, they're churches. They believe in that. I know when I was in college, I used to attend the Orthodox Presbyterian Church at Grove City College. And the second pastor they had during my time there would have the whole congregation would recite the Ten Commandments. I would always giggle a little inside about the whole coveting my neighbor's ass thing, but, that's the 14-year-old boy that's inside me coming out. So, one of the famous people in connection with the Ten Commandments, of course, is Judge Roy Moore in Alabama. Most recently, a failed Republican Senate candidate. He has the distinction of being twice removed as Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. The first time was because he dismissed a federal court order to remove a 5,280-pound granite monument to the Ten Commandments that he had placed in the state judicial building. Yeah, that guy. Later, he just totally flouted a Supreme Court decision affirming gay marriage and instructed judges in his state not to follow that Supreme Court ruling. So, he was dismissed again. Later on, he ran for Senate and got a little bit more interesting there. Whole thing about young girls and so on. And that has nothing to do with Ten Commandments, so research that if you wish. Very recently, in response to the Parkland shootings, Alabama State Senator Gerald Dial suggested placing the Ten Commandments in public schools as a means to prevent school shootings. Apparently he thought that would be a way, kids will read it and say, oh, it says thou shalt not kill. Doggone it! I was going to kill, and now I know it's wrong. I don't know. And then it's actually been placed in front of the Arkansas State House twice. The first time, a gentleman who admittedly was somewhat disturbed ran it over, destroyed it within 24 hours of it being put up. And it's up again with all kinds of interesting things around it. Some states have put it up only to have groups like Satanists and Hindus and others say, hey, if you're going to put up that Christian monument, you got to put up something of ours too. The Satanists had a Baphomet, and the Hindus had, I forget its name, but a monkey god. I think that was in Oklahoma, but I did not, that one's going from memory, so I may not find a reference for that by the time I put this up. And I could go on and on. They are part of a mural in the U.S. Supreme Court, and that's often cited by Ten Commandments supporters. There are schools all over that want to put them in or have them in. I know, at least the last time I was through it, in Alexander, North Dakota, they have the Ten Commandments right outside the city limits. I don't know if that's an official city thing or not. If it is, then they're breaking the law. But anyway, I'm not so much interested in that side of it. That's the controversial side. I only mentioned it to show you that it is a real and present topic of conversation here in the United States. What I'm more interested in is the actual Ten Commandments themselves. And don't worry, again, not a religious lecture, not an atheist lecture. We are looking at a piece of text and we're going to try to understand it a little bit better. So I suppose one of the questions we could ask is what do we actually know about the Ten Commandments? So I'll start with a 2010 Pew Research study, which actually showed, surprise, surprise, limited knowledge. About half of respondents thought that the Golden Rule was one of the Ten Commandments. That's the do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And sorry, I didn't write down the reference on that, but anyway. The most forgotten of the Ten Commandments was keep the Sabbath day holy. If you look at this survey, it's kind of interesting. This is including believers. The Ten Commandments themselves actually come from Exodus 20, verses 2 through 17, and then they're repeated, for a good of the order, in Deuteronomy 5, verses 6 through 21. And yet, there are multiple versions. There's the Jewish version, the Islamic version, a Catholic version, and a Protestant version. Since I'm based in the United States, I'm going to focus on the two Christian versions. And they differ at the beginning, at the end, yet they come from the same verses. So let's take a look at what I mean. Here's the Catholic version. Number 1. I am the Lord your God. You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Number 2. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Number 3. Remember to keep holy the Sabbath day. Now let me by the way, we're in Newell, South Dakota here. And now let me do the first two Protestant Ten Commandments. I am shuffling papers because somehow this got all sorts of messed up here. And I think I'm missing a page. Oh well, I got the first two here. So, Protestant version, number 1. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Number 2. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. And, of course, number 3, Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain. And it isn't until the 4th verse that it gets into the Sabbath. Similarly, at the end, if we go with the Catholic version first, let's go with number 10. I'm sorry, let's go with number 8, and we'll go down to 10. Number 8, Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Number 9, Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Number 10, Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. And now we'll turn it over to the Protestants. Number 8, Thou shalt not steal. Number 9, Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And number 10, this is the one that always amused me, Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. So I think you can see the differences there. They're kind of covering the same territory, but they're not numbering it the same. Thou shalt not steal, which is number 8 in the Protestant. For Catholics is number 7. The middle is basically the same about the killing and the adultery and honoring father and mother and Sabbath day and so on. The Protestants don't get to the Sabbath day till number 4. And so it's kind of interesting that they have two different versions. Now, I'm not here to explain why. That's up to the Catholics and Protestants. That's their deal. I'll just mention that one of the links I put down here is actually gives the Jewish version as well, which has its own versions. But it's interesting because they come from the same verses. Now, whether you're Protestant or Catholic, let's divide this up and look at what these laws actually are. One of the things we have here, one of the arguments you'll hear, I should say, from the religious side, the ones who want the Ten Commandments posted is, this is a first example of law. Well, that's not true. It is an example of law, but hardly the first or the most influential. Now, you have the laws of Hammurabi. You have many civilizations that came up with laws, let's be honest. And when you start looking at these laws, a lot of them are not even the foundation for laws here in the United States or many other countries. Since I grew up Protestant, I'm going to mostly focus on that version, but as I said, they contain roughly the same content. What you have in the Ten Commandments are both religious laws and, I'll admit, there's some civil laws. So let's hit a couple of these civil laws. Oh, let's see. Thou shalt not kill. That's a civil law. Our own law system here in the United States breaks killing up into several different categories. There's self-defense, there's premeditated, there's impulse, there's accidental killing, there's all those kind of things. And that's law, civil law. Thou shalt not steal, definitely a civil law. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Now that one's kind of interesting. We have laws against perjury, but there's no law against gossip and some of the other things that we do, or whether deliberate or not deliberate. You hear something juicy about your neighbor and you got to go share it. Oh, turns out it's not true. Maybe you're a spurned boyfriend or girlfriend, want to pass something untrue on about your ex just to make their life miserable. That gets into kind of a gray area. It may be illegal, it may be slander, it may not be something that can be prosecuted in court. So that's kind of fuzzy. Now, truthfully, some states, and I live in one of them, do have an remember the Sabbath day law. North Dakota has blue laws. A lot of stores cannot open till noon on Sunday because of our laws. Should that be? Personally, I don't think so. A lot of places it's not. So I would say that was inspired by religion. That's an example of religious law, poking its nose into what should be civil law. Now, the rest of these are basically religious law. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. That doesn't belong in any kind of a civil law. The government doesn't care who you worship. Don't make unto thee any graven image. Oh, good luck on that. Every time I take a photograph, do a drawing, so on. And then the whole bit in there about idol worship, again, not civil law. That's all religious. Taking the name of the Lord thy God in vain. I always struggled with what does that mean. I used to think is when people, oh God, I hate this place. Is that taking the name Lord in vain? Or is it what you hear from some Christians saying, God will curse you for this? Claiming the Lord's power for when it really isn't theirs to claim. I guess I don't know. Sabbath day, I already covered that one. Honor thy father and thy mother. I think that's a good thing to do, but again, not a civil law. What if your parents are abusive? What if they're parents that loved you up until they found out you're gay and they turned you out on the streets? There's more to that. And other places in the Bible, they take that whole honoring your parents seriously. I mean, you can stone your disrespectful child. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Yeah, that's a betrayal of trust. Is that a matter of civil law, though? Should that be illegal? Or is that part of an agreement between two people? What about people who are in an open marriage? What about people who are in a three-way marriage? That one gets, well, basically, that's not going to be civil law. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. I said, yeah. But at the same time, why just the neighbor? Why not people I don't know? Why is that not covered under this commandment? And then that last one about coveting. What if my neighbor's really good looking and I like their ass? Maybe my neighbor has a good looking wife. Apparently it's okay to covet your neighbor's husband, because that's not mentioned in the commandments. I don't have any neighbors with manservants or maidservants or oxes. Or, let's be honest, that I may live in a rural area, but by the definition meant for ass, none of my neighbors have one of them either. I guess I could covet my neighbor's car or something, because this is anything that is thy neighbor's. Which, I guess this commandment is saying that the wife belongs to my neighbor. That there's a lot missing from that. And again, what's wrong with coveting? Oh, boy, I'd love to have a garden like that. Really? What's wrong with that? I try not to be too materialistic, but there's a certain amount of, the whole reason I spray weed killer on my lawn once a year, because I don't like chemicals on my lawn or around my house. Whole reason I do it is so I'm somewhat decent among my neighbors and don't stick out as, oh, that's the house with all the weeds and the dandelions. Oh, that's... So looking at your neighbors is a piece of that. Now, if I lived in some dilapidated neighborhood where nobody cared, I wouldn't spray my lawn, because I really don't care. I like dandelions. So there is a little bit of that. My house doesn't stick out too much in this neighborhood. I mean, there are houses at both ends of the spectrum in my neighborhood of wealth and size. Mine's at the lower end, but it's a nice house. So, I don't know. But now here's a funny question. Now that I've established that there's a religious and civil law in the Ten Commandments, why is it called the Ten Commandments? I know, and the road was getting interesting by this point. Why call it the Ten Commandments? We have a big thing, and I think it maybe comes culturally from the Ten Commandments, of top 10 lists. Top 10 Doctor Who episodes. Top 10 science fiction. Top 10 worst episodes of Star Trek. We like our top 10s. But if you look at the verses, are there really only 10 commandments there? Seems to me artificially constructed. Just the difference between Catholic and Protestant Ten Commandments shows that. They're splitting them up differently. Maybe we could have 12 or 13 if we all split them up. We combine the two versions. It doesn't say the Ten Commandments anywhere amongst those verses. So what's going on? Well, there has to be something going on. And there is. So we have to get the full story of the Ten Commandments, so you get them in context to get where I'm headed with this story. And I'm not treading new ground here. This is something people have done all over the place. But anyway, so the people stop at Mount Sinai. This is kind of approximately around Exodus 19. And there's all kinds of exciting thunder and smoke and noise and stuff coming from Mount Sinai. Some have suggested it's volcanic. I was going to look that up, but I never did, so I guess I don't know. I don't really care. But anyway, Moses went up there, and I forget how many days. I didn't write that down. But anyway, while he was up there, they carved the Ten Commandments onto 2 stone tablets. And then he came down to present the law. And I believe it was 40 days, because while he was up there, the people of Israel randomly decided, hey, let's get all our gold together, melt it, and make ourselves a calf. And then we can worship it. And the movie Ten Commandments shows all kinds of weird activities going on around the worshiping. But anyway, Moses comes down, and he's like, holy cow, you guys, I'm going to whoop you, and which may be where the word holy cow comes from. And he has a little anger management issue. He breaks the Ten Commandment tablets and smashes the calf, and a few people get put to death, and yada, yada, yada. But, awkward, he's destroyed the Ten Commandments. So he's got to go up and be like, sorry, God, can I get another one, dude? So let's pick up in in chapter 34 of Exodus. And the Lord said unto Moses, hew thee 2 tables of stone, like unto the first, and I will write upon these tables the words that were in the first tables which thou breakest. All right, pause there. So it sounds like what we were just going through, where the Protestants and the Catholics are sort of disagreeing, weren't actually the Ten Commandments that Moses brought down. Well, let's move on and we'll find out. So Moses goes up there. There's a whole bunch of verses all about it, and they do the whole royalty thing that they used to do. Verse 6, and the Lord passed by before him and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, and upon the children's children, unto the 3rd and to the 4th generation. And then, Moses begs forgiveness and so on. And then God talks about how they're making a covenant. And then God says, observe, in verse 11, observe thou that which I command thee this day. Behold, I drive out before thee the Amorite, the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite. Take heed to thyself, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land whither thou goest, lest it be a snare in the midst of thee. But ye shall destroy their altars, break their images, and cut down their groves. For thou shalt worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Here I thought he was called Jehovah. And I would just note that, by the way, would be the first of the 10 Commandments. How do I know? Because in verse 28, I'll get to that in a minute, the Bible actually calls these that I'm listing now the 10 Commandments. So, worship no other God. Well, that sounds very similar. He goes into detail about, in verse 15, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they go a-whoring after their gods, and do sacrifice unto their gods, and one call thee, and thou eat of his sacrifice, and thou take of their daughters unto thy sons, and their daughters go a-whoring after their gods, and make thy sons go a-whoring after their gods. Thou shalt make thee no molten gods. So now we're through the first one, basically, or the second one. Now, the first one is, don't worship any other god. Second one, don't make any idols. The third one, verse 18, the feast of unleavened bread shalt thou keep. 7 days shalt thou eat unleavened bread, as I commanded thee, in the time of the month Abib. For in the month Abib thou camest out from Egypt. So, yeah, other than here, I don't really know anything about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Verse 19 is our 4th commandment. All that openeth the matrix is mine, and every firstling among thy cattle, whether ox or sheep, that is male. But the firstling... So that's commandment 13. So he's saying that the first one is supposed to be used for sacrifice. And remember, this is a people that practiced animal sacrifices. And then we get into the next one. But the firstling of an ass thou shalt redeem with a lamb. And if thou redeem him not, then thou shalt break his neck. All the firstborn of thy sons thou shalt redeem, and none shall appear before me empty. Now, this would be an interesting topic to explore further on, and maybe in another video. But apparently it's suggesting that you're supposed to put your firstborn son up for sacrifice. Now, you ask any apologist, they'll say, oh, no, 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 that's not what they mean. That's what the other people did. God was specifically saying no with the story of Isaac and Abraham. That's the one where Abraham took his young son up on, oh, I forget what mountain. But anyway, God commanded him to sacrifice his son, so he ties up his son on the altar, raises up the knife to get him, and then God conveniently provides a goat that's head is caught in a bush nearby. So apparently that was a test of faith, and I have heard that interpreted as saying that, see, human sacrifice isn't a thing with this religion. Well, Abraham was willing to go through with it. Just saying. So I don't really know, but when you hear that it suggested that human sacrifice was part of the faith at one time, this is one of the places that comes from. All right, let's move on. 6 days, what is this, number 6? 6 days shalt thou work, but on the 7th day thou shalt rest. In earing time and in harvest thou shalt rest. So, that's in the Ten Commandments. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. And thou shalt observe the Feast of Weeks, of the first fruits of wheat harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering at the year's end. So, apparently we've got another festival in the Ten Commandments we have to observe. Thrice in the year shall all your men children appear before the Lord God, the God of Israel. I guess he doesn't care about the women children, just the men, but, this wasn't an equal rights sort of religion. Let's see. I lost track of which one I'm on right now, but whatever, we'll move on. I think this is number 9. Oh, it goes on for a little babbling there. But then in verse 25, thou shalt not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leaven, neither shall the sacrifice of the feast of Passover be left unto the morning. So he's basically saying, don't put yeast in the blood of any sacrifice, which is an interesting requirement. I don't know why. And any sacrifices from the Passover festival can't be kept around till the morning. So you got to eat them, I guess, or whatever you do with them. Burn them, whatever. And let's see. The first of the firstfruits of thy land thou shalt bring unto the house of the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk. So, 2 things here. The very first things that come out of the best things that come out of your soil belong to the Lord, which is convenient if you're one of the priests. And apparently I'm not supposed to cook a young goat in its mother's milk. So now you know. And it took 40 days for Moses to accomplish this. Apparently, according to verse 28, he didn't eat bread or drink water. But then, also in verse 28, so Exodus 34, verse 28, listen to this. And he wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. So when you hear about the 10 Commandments, these are the 10 Commandments. You don't hear any churches saying to put these up anywhere. But this is the only place in the Bible that the 10 Commandments are used. These are what the Bible calls the 10 Commandments, not the ones we are all familiar with and which are controversial, and which Judge Roy Moore attempted to put in the Supreme Court building, and which these states are attempting to put in front of their state houses, and which that, what was his name, Gerald Dial wants in the schools. This isn't these, but these are the 10 Commandments. So that's a little bit awkward. And you can tell I've got a lot of papers in front of me, and I don't really have a desk, so they're shuffling all over the place. But I guess if you want to come to a message with this, my message, by the way, I'm cutting across here over to Highway 85, and I'll put the name of the road as a subtitle here. I just don't remember it off the top of my head. Oh, there we go, 168. But anyway, I guess if I wanted a message here, remember I started this out with a Pew survey, and I could point you to a lot of surveys. Basically, a lot of people who take their religion very seriously and are very devout don't actually spend a whole hell of a lot of time reading their Bible. And I would suspect the same is true of people in non-Christian religions as well. They just don't read it. They may go to church or not. They'll talk about how they value it, and those wonderful words of life, as the old hymn goes. There's that country song. There might be a little dust on the Bible, but don't let it fool you about what's inside. People don't read the thing. They'll go to Sunday school. They may look up their favorite passages, but they don't actually sit down and do the hard work of reading the thing. And it is hard work because you've got multiple authors. You have a lot of, honestly, hard to understand content. And then you have all the begats and so on. And you can read through it, just reading it. But you really, if you're reading something, you got to stop and ask questions, Oh, are these really the 10 Commandments? Why are these the 10 Commandments and not these? Oh, this says these are the 10 Commandments. And, right there you've got the verse at the beginning of this, the very first verse, chapter 34, saying that this is what was brought down from Mount Sinai the first time. So what's going on there? And why don't more Christians realize this? This is one of those gotchas that atheists like to use. See, you don't even know your own Bible. And it's true, a lot of them don't. I was reading a survey that actually showed atheists and Jewish people are better informed about their own religion than Christians. I think in a lot of ways, in this country, religious faith is more a social thing than it is a matter of heart or actual true belief. If you really believe that that Bible was written by God, the creator of the universe, wouldn't you want to read it? Wouldn't that be an important thing to read? And yet you'll meet a lot of Christians that don't. I met a woman who told me that she got as far as the Noah's Ark story and that whole thing about him, the nakedness there, and she'd had enough. And she said it would destroy her faith if she kept reading further. As far as I know, she's still a believer. I've kind of lost touch with her, but that was kind of interesting. So, I'm not trying to take a stand here except for one thing, which is to say you need to read that Bible if you believe it. You need to be armed and ready when people who are not believers come along and say, well, what about this verse that's in the Bible? Maybe get a little context. Some of the things that are cited as contradictions in the Bible are not actually contradictions. Some of them are. And it's good to know what they are. And if you're not a believer, of course, if you're living in the United States, this book is a powerful part of our culture, for better or for worse. And again, it's good to know what's in it. So that was the point behind all this. I found it interesting that, because I didn't know this for a long time, that the word 10 Commandments aren't what the Bible calls 10 Commandments. The ones we're fighting over aren't what the Bible calls the 10 Commandments. And that casts a whole new light on it. And then just looking at the 10 Commandments, the ones we call the 10 Commandments, even though the Bible doesn't call them that, analyzing them and saying, oh, most of those we wouldn't want as laws anyway. All in all, it's eye-opening. And I might give you a new perspective on the whole debate over the 10 Commandments. And perhaps help people realize, and this would be any religion, how far religions actually travel away from their own text. And sometimes, thank God. I just said that. Like, for example, the stoning of unruly children. You might want to throttle them once in a while, but really, who wants to do that? It's a good thing. So, I don't know. This is probably one of those topics that will lose me subscribers, but whatever. I think it's a good thing to just, whether you're a believer or not, to just sit down and analyze that book. And I think I've analyzed a small piece of it. And I would encourage you to analyze other pieces of it. Or if you're of a different faith tradition, analyze your own holy books. If you're a Muslim, analyze your Quran. If you're a Hindu, the Bhagavad Gita. I think that's the Hindu book. Just learn. Find out what you really believe outside the interference of your religious organization that you happen to be a part of. So anyway, thank you for watching. And hopefully I'll see you again next week. I don't know if I'll continue with the snow or if I'll be ready for a change. I might be ready for a change. I've got some other drives I want to get onto, and this one isn't that interesting. But here we are pulling up on Highway 85, which does seem to be a good natural stopping point. So I'm going to head north to home, and interestingly, as you can probably tell, by the time I got home, there wasn't a whole lot of snow around. So that was annoying, but it's a good thing I didn't go to Rapid City on this trip, because I would have been stuck overnight there, because it did get really bad down in South Dakota. So thank you for watching. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.